Welcome to toy-polloi. Parental guidance. This video contains scenes of Lego destruction.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and in today's video we're going to be looking at repairing this vintage He-Man and the Masters of the Universe Ninjor. As you can see, he's been in the wars a bit, his legs have come off, he's only got a couple of his weapons, of which one of them, the bow here, is broken. We need to sort out getting him his nunchucks as well, and he's also missing his robe, so there's a fair amount to do. I think the first thing we need to do with him though is to actually put his legs on, because until the figure is all together he looks a bit silly, and as you can see there is a fair amount of paint wear on his feet as well, so we do need to sort that out. And before we get too far into this, I need to say a massive thank you to Peter, who very kindly sent this figure in to me to restore, so thanks to him. Let's get straight on with the restoration. So here is poor old Ninjor. As you can see, I've only got two weapons, but we will be dealing with those later. The first thing we need to do is to sort out his legs. As you can see, these have become detached. This is a very common issue with all Masters of the Universe figures. The band that holds the two legs together perishes and it just needs replacing. You can buy replacement ones from all over the place. I've got a little bag of them here and I'm just going to fit them as I've fitted them many times before. I've got multiple videos on how to do this, so I'm not going to go through the whole process again, but essentially you insert it into one of the legs, pass it through the pelvis and then push it into the other leg. It's a fairly straightforward process. It normally takes about 5 minutes a figure and you get quicker as you do them. So let's get his legs attached and then we can start dealing with the other issues on this figure. And there you go, that is him all fixed up, so we can now go ahead and start touching up the paint on him. There's just a few little rubs on his eyebrows and his moustache, and we'll just use some black paint for that. For his boots and for his gloves, I found this game colour red in my sort of paint selection. This is called Bloody Red. This is 72.010 and that looks like a pretty much perfect match straight out of the pot, so I'll just use that to paint on. Because it's black, it may take a couple of coats to cover it, but it should cover pretty well. Then once that's done, I will put a satin varnish on top of that, which is a Vallejo satin varnish, and that will give it the same sort of sheen that you can see here on the original paint. This game colour is a matte finish paint, so if you just paint that on it will look very matte. You need the satin finish just to give it that same sort of finish. So yeah, let's get this all painted up and make him look as good as new. Right, that's the first coat on. He's going to have to dry for a little while before I put the second coat on. So while we're waiting for that to happen, let's get on and make a pattern for his robes. And here is my basic pattern based off of those photos. It's a strange shaped one, basically because you've got these long tails that have to wrap around his body, and it appears that these tails actually fold over. So when you look at the garment itself, it sort of tapers down to a point, but actually the original piece of fabric is sort of square like this, and they are folded. It doesn't look like they are sewn, and I've asked Uncle Hemo, my friend who sent me the photos, if they are sort of glued in any way, and he thinks they might be. So we can add a little bit of double-sided tape or something down those bits to make them fold in. So we've got this really long, odd shaped sort of piece to cut out, and then we need to cut out two of these, which are for the hood section. At the moment this is a sort of prototype version, so I'll cut this out, we'll cut out some fabric and get sewing and see what happens. If this all works, I will draw this pattern up fully and put it available for everyone to download and use themselves. But let's start by turning this pattern into a prototype version and see how well that works. Toy-polloi. So I've just pinned that pattern onto this material, which is called looped fleece or toy knit. It's not exactly the same as the original one, but it's one that I use for a lot of toy restorations and repairs. It's much like the fabric used for Star Wars capes, and it's really easy to deal with, really easy to cut, and it doesn't fray. I'll put a link to where I get this in the description. It comes from AliExpress, and you can get it in multiple colours. So I've just got a large amount of black here. Let's cut these pieces out and then start sewing. The actual main body part of this, the sort of the main part of the robe, doesn't need a huge amount of sewing. We've basically just got to sew the hood on. The hood is a little bit more awkward. This is my pattern for that. We've got to sew around this back edge, we've got to do a little hem on the front of it, and then we've got to sew this bottom edge around onto here. So that's the most complicated part. The main part is fairly straightforward. So let's get these cut out and we'll do a bit of sewing. We're going to start with the non-sewing part first. Now these tails are the sort of the tie part of the robe are supposed to be folded together, and looking at the photos that I was sent, it looks like they were sort of glued from about halfway down. So what I've done, just as a test on this one at the back here, is I've put some double-sided tape down the middle of it, and you can see that we've got the same sort of result. So I'm going to do the same on this side. Double-sided tape, you know, it's probably not the best way of doing this. Maybe there's an iron-on sort of glue that you could use, but it's what I have here. So I've cut myself a little bit of tape. I'm just going to cut a thin strip of that off, and we'll stick that on. And it seems to give the same sort of look as the original robes, and it's very easy to do, and that's often the best way of doing things. So we'll stick a piece of that just down the inside of that piece there, and we'll take the cover off and just fold it over. You know, this may not be the best way of doing it. Maybe you could sew it if you wanted to do a sort of neater version of it, but it certainly seems to give a result that looks like the original. So I'm now going to grab these pieces and just fold them over as neat as I possibly can. Bit awkward with the tape in the way. There you go, that sort of gives you the effect of the original robes there. So we've got sort of double thickness at this end, and that will give it a little bit of sort of structure, so when we tie it around the figure it should look correct. So now we can get on with some sewing. We've got to sew these two pieces together. So this is the hood. We're going to put them with the nice surfaces on the inside, and then I've just got to sew quickly around this back edge, so the sort of curved side. So we'll sew a few millimeters in from the edge, we'll sew along there. Then we need to put a hem on it, but yeah, let's get the first two pieces sewn together, then we can worry about that next stage. Okay, so that is that seam sewn, and it was at this point I've realised that is not actually going to work because we need a piece to go around the front of his face. If you look at this picture that I found online, you can see that it sort of wraps around the front of his face in a sort of more of a face mask type thing. So I've actually redrawn my pattern and sewed it again. I've added this extra piece on the front. I've now sewn this version, so I've sewn along this back edge here and then just down this little front piece here, and then when we turn this inside out, you can see this now actually looks like a mask, and I think that is how it was constructed. My first go, as you know, was just a sort of a guess, and that's what happens when you do these sort of prototypes. You work out what is going to work and what isn't going to work. So this is, I think, as close as I'm going to get to that version. So I'll turn it back the wrong way around because we've now got to sew this into the main section of the robes, and that's going to be fairly tricky because we've got to sew around this curve, and I don't think you sew all the way to the back. I'm going to leave maybe about 1 centimetre on either side, so I'll sew this around, join these two pieces together and leave a little centimetre at the back so that we've got the two sort of ribbons hanging off the back of it, and then I think we should end up with something that works pretty well. Yeah, but it's a bit awkward for sure, but yeah, I think we're going to get there. I've just got to work out which way round now to sew this. So actually I think I probably do need to turn this round the right way like that, and then put those two pieces together. Yeah, if I do it round the right way and then just sew along the bottom, that should work. So let's get those last bits sewn and we'll see if this actually works on the figure. Right, the hood is now sewn on, and I've made a couple more modifications as I've gone along because I realised that the hood was actually a bit too tall, so I've chopped a little bit off the top and re-sewn that. But you can see we're getting something that looks like it will fit on the figure quite well. So you can see I've sewn around the front there. I've not sewn fully round the back of the hood. It stops about 1 centimetre from either side of the seam, but that looks much like the original one. So let's try it on the figure. The paint on Ninja has now dried, so he's here, and you can see that actually that's looking all good. His boots are now bright red. I've touched up most of the marks on his gloves, but not all of them because there's a few areas where it looked like it was just sort of badly sprayed, so I've left that, and I've touched up the paint on his head as well. So let's put this on the figure. So that goes on like that. So we should just be able to see really just about his eyes. Then this flap folds down the front, and if we turn him over, these strips need to be crossed over like that, and then we fold them around the front, make sure we've hooked everything in place, make sure it lies nice and flat. So that one goes over that way, and this one comes over that way like so, and then it goes round the back of the figure, and we can tie it in a bow or however you want to tie it. I'm just going to do a quick knot because we'll have to take this off to put some more detail on because we haven't got the logo on there yet. But you can see that fits really well. I think that's as close as I'm going to get to how this fits, but I'm happy with it. But as you can see, we are missing that logo on the front, so let's sort that out. To do that, I need to recreate that in Photoshop first, and then I'm going to print it out onto some sticky backed fabric printer paper that I have. So this is a fabric based paper, and you can print on it with a normal printer and then cut it out, and we'll just stick that on. I think that should finish this off rather well, but I'm happy with that. That looks much like the original sort of robes for Ninja. Very, very pleased with that. And here we go, this is what I've made. So this has now been printed out onto some fabric sticky backed printer paper. You can pick this up online. It's quite sort of interesting stuff. This is a fabric paper you can just run through a normal inkjet printer, and then all we've got to do is cut it out and stick it onto his robes. But you can see it gives a really nice convincing result. What I've done with the logos, I've sort of redrawn it all. I've put a grey line around the edge of it. You'll need to cut off the grey line because you just want the black outline with the little dragon and sword in the middle of it. So yeah, let's get that cut out and stick it onto this. I'm going to remove the robe so that I can stick it onto it nice and flat, and then we'll put the robes back on. And hopefully that will look like the original one would have. Now we come on to the weapons, of which I have two, which is the bow and arrow and the sword. The sword actually isn't in too bad condition. There's a little bit of a bite mark there, not a lot we can do about that, so I'm just going to leave that as is. With the bow and arrow, you can see that it's snapped just here, just below the handle, and that's quite an awkward place to snap, because I think if we try to glue that, it's fairly thin where the two surfaces join together, and there's a little bit of sort of sprung tension on this. If we just glue that, it's just going to ping apart. So what we need to do is add some reinforcements to that and basically pin and glue it. So what I'm going to do is drill a very small hole into this side of the brake and likewise on the other side. And then I'm going to insert a tiny piece of staple. So this is just a normal everyday staple. I've got a few of them here, but I can just break off one from the end, or maybe a few from the end. Let me break off one. There we go. So we've got one staple. I'll cut a small amount of that and insert it into the holes, and then I'll glue it, and that will just give it that extra little bit of strength and should stop it from pinging apart. Hopefully should hold it a little bit firmer together. So let's get those holes drilled, and to do that I'm going to use a pin vise, which I've shown many times before. Here on toy-polloi I've got a whole selection of different size drill bits, and I've just chosen one that's fairly small and about the same diameter as the tiny bit of staple that I'm going to use. And I've just really got to drill these holes as neat and as sort of close to the centre as the brake as I possibly can, so that hopefully it will all line up. It's going to be a little bit awkward to do just because of the shape of this bow, but I reckon we can do something. So yeah, let me drill these holes and we'll see if it works. Okay, so there you go. I've drilled two holes, and you can now see there's a tiny piece of that staple just inserted in there. This is without glue at the moment, but you can see that stops this part sort of pinging forwards. If I unclip this, you can see that part has a tendency to pull forward. So the little bit of staple is just enough to hold it in place, and then by the time we've added some glue to that, I think that will hold it really quite firmly. I will be gluing this with super glue, but I'm going to apply it with a pin. A pin that I have stuck into an old paintbrush that I've shown you many times before. Let me get that ready and I'll show you exactly what I mean. But I think that's going to work, yeah, really well. Okay, so here is the tool that I use to apply the glue. It just gives you complete control over where you put it. I'm going to be putting some glue just on this bit of paper here, then I can scoop it up and essentially just drop it on, get a drop on the end of this pin and drop it exactly where I need it. I'm also going to put a little bit of glue onto the tiny bit of staple that I've cut. You can see here, this is the piece of staple I cut. It's a very small piece. So what I'll do, again, put some super glue onto this, and I will dip this into the super glue and then drop it into the hole just to give that extra little bit of strength to the bond of everything. So let's get this all stuck on. So here's some super glue. I'll put a little bit of that just on this paper. like so. I will grab the tiny piece of staple in the tweezers, and I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on one end of it, and then we'll drop that into the first hole like that. Now I need to get some glue on the other end, so that's where this pin comes in. So I can grab a little bit of glue onto the pin, rub it onto the staple, then we'll line those two up, push them together, and now I've got complete control. I can grab some glue on this and just rub it onto the areas where I actually want the glue to be, so that it doesn't spread anywhere else. And then I can push these two parts together, and hopefully that will glue. Which it feels like it has. So there you go, that's a nice neat join, and it's got that extra little bit of reinforcement on the inside. I might just put a little bit more super glue around into some of the slight gaps there are there, and capillary action should pull it in, and then we can just let that set. That's a nice strong bond. Now we come on to the nunchucks, which are missing on this figure. And I've had a quick look online to see what people are selling them for, and they go for crazy money. So it's a fairly simple shape. I think we can just make something, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. The photos I have of the nunchucks give me some good measurements, so we can see that it is essentially a cylinder that's 2.5 centimeters long with a little fixing on one end, and then a tiny amount of chain across the middle. It's fairly simple, and something I reckon we can easily make just with some styrene rods and some styrene sheet and a little bit of chain. So in my toolbox I found this piece of styrene rod. In fact, it's something I bought recently for another project. This is 4mm styrene rod. If we bring in Ninjor, you can see that it fits in his hand really nicely. So I think that is what we're going to use as the basis. So what I'm going to do is cut off a 2.5 centimeter length of this and sort of file it down and sand it to get it nice and smooth, maybe round off the ends. Then I have this tiny offcut of 2mm styrene sheet, which I will stick onto the end, and I'm going to fashion that tiny little attachment. You can see it's a sort of rounded flat piece with a hole in the middle, so we've got to have to drill a hole in it, and then we need to paint it this sort of silver colour to match the rest of the weapons. Fairly simple, so let's just get on and make it. And there we go, that's what I've made. It's fairly simple. It is just a rod of styrene with a little bit at the end just shaped to make a little sort of hole for the chain to go in. And I've painted it, or sort of inked it up to be silver, just using a silver Sharpie, and the end result is it looks pretty good. If I bring in one of the other weapons, it's a reasonable match to the finish, so I'm happy with that. So happy, in fact, I've made another one, so we've now got two of them. So that's both the ends of the nunchucks. Now we need to just sort out the chain. Now I have ordered some chain on eBay. I was sort of searching around. I found something that looked about the right size, but it hasn't turned up. So I'm going to quickly make something using what I have here. and that is Lego. I've got these Lego chains that I've used before actually on another He-Man Masters of the Universe project when I was working on Snake Mountain, and this stuff is really good. It's really easy to use and really easy to cut and shape. So looking at the photo, it looks like we need 7 links. I'm just going to cut off 7 links of this chain and then put it onto here. I think it should work. We should be able to just sort of trim through one of the links and make it so that it's bendable enough that we can unhook it, and I think I should be able to push that back on. Unlike metal chain, you can't sort of bend it and unbend it, so we've just got to see if we can do it with this, but I think it should work. So let's cut off one of these links at the end, the sort of starting links. Let's see if we can unclip that, which we can. So we need 7 links of this chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if I cut this one, I'm going to cut it sort of fairly low down, just with my plastic nippers, and see if I can unhook that. Does it unhook? It does. And now I'm hoping that we can just hook this onto here. It should have enough bend that we can hook it back on. Might be a bit awkward. Let's see if we can do it. If this doesn't work, I'm going to have to wait for the metal chain that I've ordered, but I'm hoping that this, you know, Lego's got a fair amount of give to it. You can twist these pieces, so I think we can do this. There we go, I think that's in. Which it is. Can I rotate that around to the end? No, I think I'm going to have to actually make the hole that I've drilled in there a little bit bigger. It's a little bit too small. You can see that I can't rotate that link round. If I could, that would have worked really well. So I'm just going to enlarge that hole just ever so slightly so that there's a little bit more give in it. Okay, a couple of modifications later and I've got that Lego to fit. So there you go, you can see I've now got some nunchucks with a bit of chain in the middle, and they work really well. It's quite a convincing little sort of build, that. Obviously, if I ever get the chain that I've ordered from eBay, which still hasn't turned up, I will get these sort of replaced with that. But for the moment, that Lego's working very well, and yeah, I'm happy with how that sort of looks. So let's bring in Ninjor and stick those in his hand just to see how he looks. Yeah. That works really well. Quite a convincing little build. These are no way going to sort of fool anyone if you're looking for original nunchucks. They're not going to fool anyone. You can clearly see that they've been handmade. But for display purposes, I think they're going to work very nicely. So I'm just going to slot those under his belt, because obviously this guy has way too many bits of weaponry to actually hold it all in one go. So if I put those in his belt like that, he can then hold the bow, which I've got off to one side. So put the bow in his hand. I put the sword on the back side of his robes, and otherwise I think he's pretty much finished. And here we go, here is the finished Ninja figure. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. It's been a fair amount of work just because we've had lots to make and lots to work out, but it's been really worth it. You can see this is a very displayable looking figure. The robes are certainly unique in how they are constructed. There's a lot of strange ideas gone into that, but I think they do work remarkably well. I like the way they wrap around and then you tie them at the back. It's a sort of really interesting sort of way that Mattel thought about making it. And then we've obviously had to fix the weapons, repair his legs, repaint him, make him some nunchucks, but the end result is a very displayable looking figure, and I'm going to be pleased to put this with the rest of my collection. The files that I have made for this, the pattern for the robes and the image to go on his front, the little emblem to go on the front, will be available for free from toy-polloi.com, so if you want to make your own, do go and check that out. And the fabric that I have used, which is called toy knit or looped fleece, I'll put a link to that in the description. I need to say a massive thank you to Peter, who very kindly sent me the remains of this Ninjor to fix up. It's been a really fun project, so thanks to him. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to check out some of my other Masters of the Universe related projects that I've covered on this channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.